And joining me now to discuss this further is David Patrikarakos, who is the author of Nuclear Iran, The Birth of an Atomic State, and Borzou Daragahi. He is a senior non-resident fellow at the Washington, D.C.-based think tank, the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for both of you for being here. Let's begin with you, Borzou. What is the sentiment on the streets of Iran following these sanctions?
I mean, I think it's a little bit tough to tell just because it's hard to get eyes on the ground. But, you know, there seems to be a palpable anger, and that has been going on for months. You know, a lot of it directed at the regime, some of it probably directed at the Trump administration. There's frustration. The rial has collapsed. This is causing a lot of pain for ordinary people, making their daily struggles even harder than they were before.
You've got these protests that have continued for months now, intermittently, but the state has allowed them, hasn't necessarily cracked down hard on the protesters, despite this economic situation, relations with the US. Why is that, David?
Look, I mean, the Islamic Republic is in a tricky situation. Borzou was absolutely right in what he says. There's a lot of anger, and I mean, it should be pointed out as well that it is not lost on the Iranian people that while they are struggling, billions have been poured into adventurism across the Middle East. So I speak to people in Iran, and, you know, there is a sense of, well, why, when we don't have enough food, well, not quite enough food, but why, when we're struggling so much, are we funding adventures at the other end of the Middle East to, you know, support this sort of regime's adventurism? I mean, we have also, you know, the sort of perennial issue of demographics as well. It's a very young society. I remember studying Persian in Iran and seeing people that had come to study engineering end up studying French literature. I don't think they probably ended up getting jobs. So the regime, it's very tricky for them at the moment. You know, push too far and things could spill over. At a time where they really don't want things to spill over, we have the imposition of sanctions. Things are going to get worse. So if you start cracking down now, I think it's bad news for the regime. One thing they are good at is handling uprisings. They were born of one themselves. And
they handled it in 2009. David alluded to Syria. How important is Syria for the regime?
I think that the Syrian adventure, as well as their interventions in Iraq and Yemen and so on, but Syria especially, are seen by many people inside the regime as existential. They did not want Bashar al-Assad to go. They saw that as an extremely important thing to maintain his power. They spent a lot of money and spilt a lot of blood defending Bashar al-Assad, and now they're kind of stuck. If they pull out at this point without anything much to show for it, no business deals, no real political influence, they lose. But if they keep going in and keep getting more deeply involved in Syria, they're going to be drawing a lot of international as well as domestic attention to this intervention. And, you know, they lose in that sense as well.
But don't these sanctions then, I'll bring David in here as well, flip things around? U.S. intervention doesn't necessarily unify people behind Rouhani, behind the leadership?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, first, you know, you have to say, you said Rouhani and the leadership. I mean, Rouhani is not the leadership. You know, the leader of Iran is the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and people have to understand it. Now, the Syria thing, you're absolutely correct. It was seen as existential by the regime. You know, it's a land bridge to Hezbollah. It's, I mean, if Assad falls, then they were worried Tehran was next. I would differ slightly in the sense that I think that battle is pretty much won now. With the Americans now, with Russia especially, Assad, I think, is not going anywhere. I think Iran has more or less achieved what it wants. But the thing is, you have to, you know, you have to sort of differentiate between what the regime believes to be an existential threat and the fact that people don't have enough jobs and there's hyperinflation and the rial is collapsing.
But then the regime can turn around and say that, oh, it's Rouhani's fault. Does it then necessarily save itself? Borzou.
I mean, they're already saying that it's Rouhani's fault. They're saying, you know, see, we told you so. You made this deal with the Americans. We gave up our nuclear program as kind of low end as it was. And what have we got to show for it? I think those domestic political battles would be going on no matter what. So I'm not sure if that's such a huge issue. You asked a good question. Will the sanctions affect the pocketbook of the regime? I think ultimately no. I think it will hurt ordinary people, but the oil sales will continue. As a matter of fact, it might make the hardline elements of the regime more powerful as there's less private sector, business interactions with the rest of the world, and more resources devoted proportionally to the state.
I want your answer, but I want you to answer about something else as well.
Sure.
Flipping everything around, the sanctions in Syria and Iran and Turkey on opposite ends on the Syrian conflict. But now Turkey says it'll stand by Iran when it comes to these sanctions. So the pocketbook, as Borzou said, might not be hurt.
No, absolutely. Look, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, which actually, funnily enough, it was Rafsanjani who became a great enemy of them. He was the one that let them into the economy in the 1980s. Look, they are masters at sanctions busting. They are masters at making money from this. But again, you have to differentiate between the regime and elements in the regime and the people. Now, the question is, how much pressure can the people take? How much can they take? Now, Donald Trump was absolutely cretinously stupid to tear up the nuclear deal. I mean, I say tear it up at the American end because people often make the mistake of thinking it's a bilateral deal between Iran and the US. It's not. It's between Iran and the P5+1. But in the final analysis, who did the Iranians care about? The Americans, obviously. Now, this was why when Obama extended his hand to the Islamic Republic, it was a problem for them because the raison d'etre, or a great reason for the emergence of the Islamic Republic, is to defend against the great state. The Shah was the great poodle, the puppet. But the fact is, when your great enemy extends a hand to you, it's a lot harder for you to say that he's an existential threat. Now, what Trump has done by ripping up the nuclear deal, by talking tough against Iran, has to a certain degree made, and Borzou was absolutely right, there's a constant dialectic going on internally between hardliners and moderates. I use the term loosely, it's all relative. Going on constantly, and he has emboldened the hardliners. And it could be not only politically, saying to Rouhani, you were always wrong to trust the great Satan, because you remember when the deal was made, afterwards Khamenei made a point of saying, this is it. This is not going to be the thin end of the wedge. No more détente. And now many of those around him are saying, look, we were right. So Rouhani is weakened. But at the same time, these sanctions will hurt the people. And that, whatever the regime may make personally, it's going to be a problem.
An olive branch coming from the Europeans. They've said they will continue trading with Iran. How possible or plausible can it be to overcome these U.S. sanctions?
I think it's plausible, but it's tough. I think that, for example, there would be no problem with small and medium-sized businesses. Those trades will continue, the business will continue with the EU as well as with Turkey and other countries. Where it gets into problems is like big companies. Mercedes-Benz already said that they're going to shut down their rather small probatory operations in Iran. These huge companies that have, and we're not just talking about cars, we're talking about very specialized equipment. For example, the equipment needed to make specialized lenses for, various high-end industrial stuff. These companies that do a lot of business globally, these high-end companies can't do business in Iran anymore because they can't afford to lose the U.S. market. They can't afford to be barred from making dollar transactions. But you're going to still have business taking place. It's going to go underground a little bit. It's going to be more small scale. I think that realistically speaking, looking at the history, the Islamic Republic of Iran will survive through these sanctions. It just won't be in a better place afterward.
The people might not. Despite the sanctions, there are some winners, so to speak. We mentioned Syria. We haven't mentioned Russia in all of this. David?
I mean, Russia's played a very clever game in Syria, and it's got pretty much what it wanted. And, this is a country which also has very, very big problems at home. I mean, when Putin came to power, he made a very clear deal, albeit tacit one, with the Russian people, which was, you accept higher standards of living for more autocracy, because obviously Russia is essentially an almost one-resource economy. Oil prices were going through the roof, and that, happened. Then, of course, Russia has now, for having falling energy prices, has a lot of, more internal grumblings, and they have placated their population by adventurism again. Now they have this naval facility, people call it a base, it's not. At Tartus, it's a naval facility, so they do have interest there.
Yeah, but some would say it's also become some sort of a problem solver, the go-to people when it comes to Israel and Iran, for example, in Syria.
At the moment, go-to, but it hasn't solved anything. As a matter of fact, in many respects, the Russian mendacity, telling everyone what they want to hear, has escalated the situation in Syria between Iran and Israel and created a very dangerous situation for everyone.
It also cannot last. Russia, I mean, you're absolutely right. Russia can't keep telling everyone what it wants to hear for any length of time. This is not a sustainable policy.
For Russia?
For everybody.
region.
For
Or
everybody.
Iran.
Yeah, for the region.
You know, and Turkey is...
For the Americans.
I think Turkey is getting played by Russia as well. I think every single country is getting played by Russia, and Russia plays this mediating role, but it can't deliver anything. It can't let, you know, Camp David, the U.S. Showered money on Egypt, showered money on Israel, got them to do peace, you know, pushed them into a room together. Russia can't do that.
No. Russia is you know, going broke pretty quickly.
It's fascinating. We started the conversation with Iran and we're ending it with
But
Russia.
you can't separate the two now, especially in the Middle East.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank
Borzou.
you.